In today's episode, we are going to talk about one of my favorite strategies to help someone who is suicidal, and one that I wish I would have used earlier in my career. Hang out with me for a bit while we learn about how code words are such a cool suicide prevention measure. Hi, welcome to Suicide Prevention Lady Podcast, where we make intervention easy. I'm your host, Dr. Ricky Turner. I am a suicide intervention expert. Please take note. I am the thinky kind of doctor and not the medical kind of doctor. So please do not take anything in this podcast as medical advice. I'm so excited to do today's episode as it follows immediately after the previous episode that I talked with my good friend Michelle about a time in her life when she was suicidal. And I was in a position to be able to help her and get her through that time. She was one of my first, not my first by any stretch, but earlier in my career. And looking back, this is a tool that I wish I would have used with her, and many others. This is also a tool I continue to use in my day-to-day life with people who are close to me, helping them set this up. So, what is a code word? That's pretty self-explanatory. A lot of people use these in various different things. Now, I know where some of your dirty little minds are going, right? It sounds a lot like a safe word. It is. It's very similar to a safe word. In fact, so some of you may already be really familiar with this. So what you do is with a code word, there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of shame around saying, "Hi, I need help." This is with anything. It's not even just with suicide. This is with if you're having issues with money, if you're having issues in your relationship, if you need help with anything. And there's a lot of people who are fiercely independent due to a lot of trauma. Raise your hand if that is you, who have a really hard time asking for any sort of help. I mean, I'm talking, I don't even want to ask for help bringing in the groceries. I'll make 3 trips myself. Thank you very much. So for some reason, there's a lot of shame around asking for help. Everybody wants to be completely self-reliant, right? Well, triple that, or maybe even more, when it's talking to somebody and trying to reach out for help when you are thinking of ending your life. There's so much shame. People make so many false statements around it. There's so many myths that are believed, and it's really, really hard. It's one of the hardest things to ask for help for, honestly. I would put it right up there with domestic abuse, saying you need to get out of an abusive relationship, right? So what makes it easier is to have a word that you can say to somebody that they immediately know what the meaning is. And you don't have to say, "Hey, I need help." Even me talking about that right now on this podcast is super stressful. It stresses me out to even pretend to ask for help, right? You know what doesn't stress me out? Saying dollywongle. That doesn't stress me out at all. That's a funny word. I don't know if it's even a real word. Made it up one day and it's kind of stuck around. The key to a good code word is that it is outlandish. It's not something that would come up in daily conversation. It's not something you would normally say to another person, right? So if you say it, it's like, wait a minute. And the funnier, the better, right? So when I am doing trainings, when I'm out talking to people and helping them set this up as one of the tools that they can use to help their friends and family, it's always just think of just something outlandish, something that would just never occur to you to say to another human being. And let me tell you, they are phenomenal. I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. People will just say, one of Booba was one of them that came up a lot one year. They'll say like Pineapple Express, or some people said, "I love Obama," or "I love Trump," or whatever. Like they'll say like a phrase that they would never say in real life. I've had a friend who we had a common volunteer thing, and they chose a phrase to tell me if they were ever suicidal that was F the PTO. It still cracks me up to this day. Anything works. Just be crazy with it. What's a word? I had a friend one time in college who thought the word bucket was really funny. So we came up with the phrase, put it in the fuck it bucket. There's so many different ways you can go with this. It can be silly, outlandish, a phrase, it doesn't matter. But what you're going to do is you're going to talk to somebody, and when neither of you are suicidal, it's not while somebody is suicidal is not the time to set up a code word. Okay. Because if they are already suicidal, there's no need for a code word. You already know that. You need to move on to the safety planning portion and getting them help. But it's nice because if you know somebody that has struggled with it in the past, well, the biggest predictor, research shows us the biggest predictor of somebody attempting suicide is a previous suicide attempt. Just because you're depressed doesn't mean that you are going to end up suicidal, right? And just because you have attempted in the past doesn't mean you're going to again. It's just the biggest predictor of a suicide attempt is a previous suicide attempt. So if somebody has one in the past or has struggled with some sort of mental illness, then this is a good thing to have in place. And it's just a nice thing to have in place in general, because I can do a whole podcast episode on this anyway, but there's no profile of somebody who is suicidal. It affects the popular people, it affects the successful people, it affects the poor people, it affects low achieving students, high achieving students, it's the high performing athletes, the bookworms, the wallflowers, the social butterflies. It affects everybody. It can hit anybody, and you never know when somebody is struggling with it. So that's why it's good to have this in place. So if you have a best friend, if you have a child, if you have a spouse, whatever, pick somebody and do this exercise with. So you just talk to them and you're like, hey, maybe you share an episode of the Suicide Prevention Lady podcast with them and say, hey, I think we should do this, right? And then you pick the phrase, whatever, and you say, okay, if I ever say dollywongle to you, or if I text you dollywongle, I'm really struggling and I'm thinking about hurting myself, and we need to have a plan in place as to what needs to go down, right? And same with them. It can be the same word that's easier to remember, and then if you forget, you can always say, hey, what was our code word again? And they can tell you. But that way you have this already set in place, right? Now, when you say the word, it can't just be an immediate, like I said the word, oh gosh, we got to go to the hospital right now. Not necessarily. This is something you're going to work out together. Okay, well, at what point do I use this word? Is it when I'm starting to think about it? Is it when I have a plan in place? Like, where in the process do you think it's best for you guys to use the word? This goes back to my ease framework, right? When someone says that, you need to be ready with, okay, so they said this. Do they want to talk about it? Like, do they want to have a conversation where I say, oh, I'm on my way to you? Is this I need to be reminded of why, like, we knew this was coming. So, we already have a plan in place of what needs to be said to me or what we need to do, whatever. But it makes it so much easier to reach out for help. And as a suicide researcher, those help-seeking behaviors are huge, but it's so hard to ask for help. And so when the suicide prevention community continues to preach help-seeking behaviors, but there's no outside social support, and we're still not battling the stigma, and we're not doing these other things that need to happen, I have grave concerns, because as you all know by now, I fully believe that the future of suicide prevention is activating everyday people like you and I on getting them to know what to do and what to say in this kind of emergency, and to get people to understand that this is, in fact, it's a disease of the body, just like diabetes or cancer or anything like that is. It's an affliction, and death by suicide is a result of having a disease. So, and that disease likes to lie to us and likes to tell us that nobody cares, and it loves to tell us that we aren't important and the world is better off without us and all of these things. And so when your own brain is telling you these things, it's really, really hard to reach out for help. So using something like a code word just makes it easier. I don't know about you, but sitting around and being in a dark place, even though I've never been suicidal myself, I have been in a dark place. I have been in where I really needed to reach out to somebody just so that I could vent, just so I could talk, but I was afraid of being a burden on somebody else. And you never want to start a conversation with, hey, I'm over in my bed bawling my eyes out right now, and I really need somebody to talk to. That feels icky sometimes. It shouldn't. It should not. And if you're comfortable doing that, gosh, please continue on. I love that for you. And a lot of times I am that person as well. But it's a lot easier to me to text my best friend and say, Dolly Wongle. And she knows immediately, uh-oh, I need to go distract Ricky. I need to get her out of the house. We need to go do something fun. It's probably a Costco trip or a trip to Goodwill, because partying in your 40s is super fun. But doing things like that, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I encourage you to really think through this. And if you think it's a good idea, set it up with somebody in your life. It doesn't matter if either one of you have ever been suicidal or if one has or whatever. It doesn't matter. Set this up with your kids so they know, hey, I want you to know, if you're ever feeling like the world is better off without you, or that you're looking to exit life early, we go through so much as parents, and we try really hard to let our kids know how much we love them and how much we care for them, and that the world is so much better with them in it and all those things. But the reality is, it's really hard being a child right now. So setting this up with your children is huge. So like, if you're ever feeling that this, text it to me, say it to me in a conversation, whatever, and all judgment is going to fall from me. I'm not going to be your parent at that time. I'm going to be somebody who is safe for you to talk to, and we are going to figure it out, and we're going to do whatever it takes to keep you safe. That's what's going to happen. There's not going to be any trouble. You tell me what's going on in your life. We're not talking about that. We're talking about keeping you safe. So this is a way to help do that. So I've kind of rambled on a little bit. I get really into this one. It's just one of my favorite tools. And so many people are like, oh, this is genius. And it's amazing how much it can increase somebody reaching out for help. So if you're listening along and you find value in this content, I want to ask you this week to please just take a few minutes and leave a review and rating for the podcast. We're new, obviously, and we want to grow and reach more people and get this information out there. So if you would just take that few minutes to leave a review and rate the podcast, I would be just so grateful to you. And you can also leave a voice memo, which is super neat, and no one's done it yet. So that is a big hint for me to start getting some voice memos. All right. Now, code words are so powerful, and it's even more powerful when they're set up with people who are not actively suicidal. So my challenge to you guys this week is to share this episode with someone, and the two of you decide on a code word that you can use with each other if one of you ever becomes suicidal. So that's your call to action this week. And I'd love to hear about it too. On all the socials at Still You Rise Inc. And I would just love to hear from you guys and how you set this up, and maybe what your word was, because I get a weird kick out of hearing the words that you guys come up with. So tune in next week, and we're going to dive into safety plans, which is the essential next step. When someone uses that code word or someone discloses to you that they are suicidal, it's good to then set a safety plan. So we will go into that next time. So tune in next week so we can continue to learn how to intervene with ease.